The stars were quiet again, not empty, not silent. Just waiting. Back on Earth, life went on for most people. They worked, they laughed, they dreamed. They didn't feel the change that had swept through space like a wave. They didn't remember the voice that had whispered inside their minds. They didn't know how close they had come to being erased before they could grow. But some did remember. Some could still feel it. And some, like those who had changed, knew the war wasn't over. It had only just begun. Luke stood at the edge of a cliff looking out over the ocean. The wind was strong, but he didn't move. He could hear the thoughts of others like him spread across Earth and beyond. Not voices, not words, just feelings. A shared hum beneath the surface of everything. Marie walked up beside him. She looked tired but not broken. "We need to talk," she said. He nodded. "I know." They walked back to the small base hidden in the hills. Inside, the others were already waiting. Dan sat with his feet up, eyes closed. Claire stared at a screen filled with data from deep space. Jessica paced near the window, always moving, never still. Dan opened one eye. "Took you long enough." Luke gave a small smile. "We had to be sure." Claire looked up. "About what?" "That it's really gone." Jessica stopped pacing. "You don't think it is, do you?" Luke sat down. "No, I don't." There was silence. Then Claire spoke softly. "It's hiding." Dan frowned. "Why would it hide? It nearly wiped us out." "Because we surprised it," Marie said. "We weren't supposed to exist, and now we do." Claire tapped a few keys on her tablet. A new signal appeared on the screen. Faint, far away, but growing stronger. "It's calling something," she said. "Or someone." Jessica sat down hard. "Great. So much for peace." Luke looked at them all. "We've come too far to stop. Now." Dan raised an eyebrow. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we don't wait for it to come back," Luke said. "We go find it first." Silence again. Then Dan grinned. "Now you're speaking my language." Preparations began quickly. The Nova was refitted with new tech, developed from the pulse, built from knowledge humanity had no right to have. Ships like it were scattered across human space, each crewed by those who had changed, each linked by thought, by feeling, by memory. They were no longer just soldiers. They were something new, something the galaxy had never seen, and they were ready. Weeks later, the Nova led a fleet into deep space. No flags, no nations, just humans, working together, thinking together. Claire sat at her station, tracking the signal. It was stronger now, closer. "It's leading us somewhere," she said. "Then let's follow," Luke replied. They jumped, through dark space, past dead stars and forgotten worlds. They found ruins, graves of civilizations lost to time. Some had fought, some had tried to hide. None had survived. But then they found something different. A world untouched. Floating in, silence, waiting. Jessica scanned it. No signs of life, but something's there. "Something old," Marie added. Dan looked nervous. "Old and dangerous?" Luke stood up. "Only one way to find out." They landed carefully. The ground was smooth, black as night. The sky above was filled with stars that seemed too bright, too close. As they walked forward, the air changed. It felt heavier, like something was watching. Then the ground lit up. Symbols flashed beneath their feet. Lines of light spread outward, forming a massive circle. Claire gasped. "It's a gateway." "To where?" Jessica asked. Luke looked ahead. "To the beginning." The symbols pulsed once, then again, and then the ground opened. A beam of light shot into the sky, and from the darkness beyond the stars, something answered. The Aurora returned to human space, changed. Not just the ship, but everyone on board. They were no longer just explorers. They were something new, something the galaxy had not seen before. Word of their journey spread fast. Signals matching. The pulse they had created were now appearing across human colonies. People were changing. Not all of them, but some. Scientists, soldiers, even children. Some could hear the stars, feel the thoughts of others. See patterns where there once was only noise. Earth was watching. Governments debated what to do. Some wanted to stop it. Others wanted to study it. A few understood the truth. Humanity was evolving. Luke stood at the front of a large room filled with officials, scientists, and military leaders. Marie sat beside him. Dan, Claire, Jessica, and the others were there too. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. They showed them everything. The message from the dreadnought, the history of the war, the truth about the devourer, and most importantly, they showed them what had happened to them, what had changed, what they had become. At first, no one believed it. Then came the reports. Colonies waking up to strange abilities, ships moving faster than light without engines, people dreaming the same things. The signal was growing stronger, and so were they. Months passed. The Aurora stayed, docked at a research station orbiting Mars, but its crew did not rest. They trained. They taught. They shared what they had learned. Humans had always been good at surviving. Now they were learning how to fight. Not with weapons alone, but with thought, with unity, with something deeper than fear. New ships were built, not just for war, but for understanding. They carried resonance tech developed from the Aurora's journey. These ships could think, could feel, could fight back against the darkness that waited beyond the stars. And then, the signal changed. It stopped being quiet. It started calling, and something answered. Deep in space, far beyond human borders, the devourer returned. It did not come with ships. It did not come with armies. It came as a presence, a shadow in the dark, a silence that swallowed sound. Entire colonies went silent. In minutes, minds emptied, thoughts erased. People stared into the sky and forgot who they were. Panic spread, but not among those who had changed, those who had heard the call, those who had become something more. Luke stood on the bridge of a new ship, the Nova, built from the knowledge the Aurora had brought back. Beside him were Marie, Dan, Claire, Jessica, and others like them. They looked at the screen. The enemy was here. "This is it," Dan said quietly. Marie nodded. "We knew this would happen." Claire closed her eyes. "I can feel it. It's looking for us." Luke took a deep breath. "Then let it find us." He turned to the others. "We don't fight like before. We don't just survive, we show it what we've become." One by one, the new ships joined the Nova. Hundreds of them, each carrying minds linked by the pulse, each crew connected in ways no enemy could understand. As they moved forward, the stars seemed to shine brighter. Space itself felt different, like it was waiting, watching, knowing. Something new had arrived. And this time, humanity was ready. The battle did not last long, because the devourer had never faced anything like this. It tried to erase them, to unmake them. But they were not just flesh. They were thought. They were memory. They were light in the dark, and when the Nova, led the charge, the signal surged through space like fire. The devourer screamed, not in pain, in fear, and then it was gone. Not destroyed, just forgotten, like it had never been. Back on Earth, people watched the sky. Some saw nothing. Others saw everything. Luke stood on a hill outside a small town, looking up at the stars. Marie walked up beside him. "Do you think it's really gone?" she asked. He smiled slightly. "For now." She looked at him. "And what happens next?" He looked out at the sky again. "We keep going." And above them, the stars burned bright. Waiting. Watching. Ready. The Aurora moved deeper into space than any human ship had gone before. The stars were fewer now, spread out like dust on a dark canvas. The silence was thick, heavy with something none of them could name. Luke stood on the bridge, watching the screen as they approached their destination. Epsilon Eridani, once a thriving system, now empty, broken. Marie walked in behind him holding a datapad. Her face was pale. "We're not the first to come here," she said quietly. He turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" She handed him the pad. It showed old records, ship logs, distress calls, fragments of messages sent long ago. "These are from alien ships," she said. "Some of them are ancient. Some are just gone." Dan entered the room, looking tired. "I ran a scan on the debris field. There's more than just rocks out there." Luke frowned. "What else?" Dan hesitated. "Wrecked ships. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands." Claire's voice came over the comms. "You should see this." They hurried to the lab, where Claire was already pulling up images from the sensors. The screen showed what looked like the remains of a massive battle. Planets scorched to ash, moons shattered into rings of dust and stone, and in the middle of it all, a single dreadnought floating silently in the dark. Dan stared at the image. "That thing is huge." Claire zoomed in. The ship was unlike anything they had ever seen. Its hull was covered in deep scars, burn marks, and symbols that glowed faintly even after all this time. "It's still alive," Marie whispered. Jessica walked in, holding a medical scanner. "Not alive like we are, but something inside it is still running." Luke took a deep breath. "We need to board it." No one argued. Within the hour, they were suited up and in the shuttle flying toward the wreck. As they got closer, the Aurora matched orbit with the dreadnought, and the shuttle docked with a hiss. The airlock opened slowly. Inside, the hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit by soft red lights. The walls were covered in carvings, symbols, names, warnings. Some were burned away. Others were fresh. Dan scanned the nearest wall. "This language. It's the same as the station, but older." Claire stepped forward, like it came from the beginning. They moved carefully through the halls. Every step echoed like a whisper. It felt like the ship was listening. Then they found the command deck. The room was large, filled with broken consoles and cracked screens. In the center stood a tall pedestal humming softly. Lights blinked along its surface. Marie walked up to it. "This is important." Claire touched the panel. The moment her fingers met the metal, the room lit up. A voice filled the air. Not loud, not threatening. Calm, tired. "You are not the first, but you may be the last hope." Everyone froze. Dan looked around. "Was that?" "Yes," Luke said. "And it's not done." The pedestal flickered, then projected a hologram. Above it, an image formed, ships fighting in space, civilizations working together. And then darkness, something moving through the stars like a shadow, destroying everything. Claire watched in silence. "This isn't just a message. It's a history." The hologram changed again. It showed a symbol, a shape made of lines and circles, the same one they had seen before. Dan frowned. "Why does that keep showing up?" Jessica answered quietly. "Because it's the enemy." The voice spoke again. "We fought for centuries. We built alliances. We gave everything. But it was not enough." Luke stepped forward. "Who are you?" The hologram shifted. A figure appeared, tall, thin, with glowing eyes. "We were the last ones to stand. We recorded our war so others might learn, so others might fight." Marie asked, the question they were all thinking. "Fight who?" The figure raised a hand and the hologram changed again. The shadow returned. Bigger, darker, hungrier. "The Devourer." Dan swallowed hard. "What is that?" The voice did not answer. Instead, the hologram ended, the lights dimmed, the hum faded, the ship fell silent once more. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Jessica whispered, "This wasn't just a war." Claire looked at her. "What do you mean?" Jessica turned to the others. "This was genocide. Before birth. It didn't just destroy civilizations. It erased them before they could rise." Dan shook his head. "So this thing doesn't just kill. It prevents life." Luke looked at the pedestal one last time. "Then why did it let us live?" Marie answered softly. "Maybe it didn't think we mattered." They left the dreadnought feeling heavier than when they arrived. Back aboard the Aurora, the crew sat together in silence. Finally, Luke stood up. "We know what happened," he said. "Now we have to decide what to do with it." Dan looked at him. "You mean fight?" Luke nodded. "If we don't, no one will." Marie crossed her arms. "But how do you fight something that stops you before you begin?" Claire looked at the screen where the signal still pulsed in the distance. "By becoming something it can't stop," she said. And outside, the stars burned cold and distant, waiting, watching, knowing. Something new had begun. The Aurora moved through space like a whisper. Its path was quiet, steady, but something had changed. Not just the crew, but the ship itself. Systems responded faster. Sensors reached further. Even the lights seemed to hum with a new kind of life. Luke stood on the bridge watching the stars pass by. He could feel them now. Not just see them, but feel them. Like they were part of him. Like he was part of them. Marie walked in behind him, holding a data pad. Her eyes were tired but sharp. "We've got movement," she said. He turned to look at her. "Earth?" She shook her head. "No, something else." She handed him the pad. On the screen were signals, pulses of energy matching the same pattern they had found near the alien station. Only this time they weren't just in one place. They were everywhere. Claire's voice came over the comms. "Luke, you better get down here." Within minutes, the whole team was gathered in the lab. Claire stood at the main console pulling up data from across known space. "This isn't just us," she said. "It's spreading." Dan frowned. "What do you mean?" Claire pointed at the screen. "The pulse we created, it didn't just affect us. It left a mark. And now, other places are showing the same signal." Jessica looked closely. "You mean other ships?" "Not just ships," Claire replied. "Planets, stations, colonies. Anywhere humans have gone, it's showing up." Dan sat down hard. "So we're not the only ones changing." Luke looked at Marie. "Do you think they're like us now?" She crossed her arms. "Maybe. Or maybe they're just starting." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Luke took a deep breath. "We need to follow the trail." Dan raised an eyebrow. "You mean go looking for more of these signals?" "Yes," Luke said. "We need to understand what's happening, and if others are changing too, we should find them." Marie nodded slowly. "We also need to know if we're still human." The words hung in the air, because none of them could be sure anymore. Over the next few days, the Aurora followed the pulse across human space. They visited old research outposts, abandoned mining stations, and distant colony worlds. Each time, they found signs of the same energy. Some places showed nothing else, just the signal, quiet and waiting. But others had people. People who looked at them like they knew what had happened, people who didn't speak but somehow understood, and some who had changed even more than they had. On a small moon orbiting a dead planet, they met a scientist named Elliot. He had been alone for months studying strange readings in deep space. When he saw them, he smiled. "You're like me," he said. They asked how he knew. He just touched his temple and said, "I can feel you." In another system, they found a group of colonists who had begun to dream the same things. They saw war, fire, something vast and hungry moving through the stars. "It's coming," one of them told Luke, "and you'll have to choose." He asked what that meant. The colonist only looked at him and said, "You already know." Back aboard the Aurora, the crew tried to make sense of it all. Dan kept checking the systems, trying to find a reason for everything that was happening. Marie watched the others, studying how their minds worked differently now. Jessica tested blood samples, looking for physical changes. And Claire, she listened. To the signals. To the thoughts that weren't hers. To the voice that sometimes whispered in her dreams. Luke spent most of his time on the bridge, staring into space. He didn't need the sensors to know where they needed to go next. He could feel it, a pull, a call, something ancient and waiting. One night, as they drifted between stars, Marie sat beside him. "You know where we're going?" she said. He nodded. "Yes." "Will we come back?" He looked at her. "I don't think we can." She didn't ask again, because she could feel it too. They were no longer just explorers. They were something else now, something the galaxy had not seen before. And somewhere ahead, in the dark between stars, something was waiting for them, something that had been watching, waiting. And now, it was ready. The Aurora floated in silence after the attack. Not a word was spoken for a long time. Everyone was still trying to breathe normally, to clear their heads, to make sure they were still alive. Luke sat on the floor, his back against the wall. He felt like something had crawled inside him and left its fingerprints behind. His thoughts didn't feel quite like his own anymore. Sounds seemed sharper. Colors looked brighter. Even the hum of the ship's lights felt like it was speaking, to him. Marie stood slowly, holding onto the edge of her console. She looked at Dan, who was wiping blood from his mouth. Jessica was helping Claire sit up. None of them were okay, but none of them were dead either. What was that?" Jessica finally asked, her voice shaking. Dan shook his head. "I don't know. But it wasn't just scanning us." Marie took a deep breath. "It was testing us." Luke looked at her. "For what?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to the main screen and pulled up the ship's internal logs. Most of the data was scrambled, but one thing stood out clearly: the pulse. When Jessica had rerouted power through the quantum core, she had created a burst of energy unlike anything they had ever seen. It had pushed the presence out of their minds, but more than that, it had changed something inside them. Claire stared at the readings. "We're not the same." Dan looked at her. "What do you mean?" "Our brainwaves," she said. "They've shifted. Somehow the pulse affected us." Jessica frowned. "You mean we're different now?" Luke stood up. "I can feel it, so could the others." Marie saw things differently. Sounds had shapes. She could almost see the way people were feeling just by looking at them. Dan said he could remember details he hadn't noticed before. Small changes in the way the ship sounded. Tiny shifts in light. Jessica said time felt slower, like she could see every moment stretch before it happened. And Luke, he felt like he was connected to everything, like the ship wasn't just metal and wires, but something alive. "This isn't normal," Dan said, sitting down hard. "None of this is normal." Marie looked at the team. "Maybe it's not supposed to be." Luke turned to Jessica. "Did you mean to do this?" She shook her head. "No, I was just trying to stop it. I didn't think, I just acted." Claire looked at the screen again. "Whatever happened, it's still happening." Marie zoomed in on the energy signature left behind by the pulse. It wasn't fading. It was spreading. Through the ship. Through space, maybe even through them. "We've changed," Marie said softly. "And I don't think we can go back." Dan rubbed his temples. "So what does that make us now?" Luke didn't answer right away. He looked at each of them in turn. They were tired, scared, confused. But there was something else too. Something new. "I don't know what we are," he said finally. "But we're not just humans anymore." Marie nodded. "We're something more." Outside the windows, the stars burned cold and distant, but now they felt closer, like they were watching, waiting. Inside the Aurora, the air felt heavier. The ship's systems ran smoothly, but there was a hum beneath it all, a quiet vibration that only the crew could feel. They weren't just surviving, they were evolving. Hours passed, then days. Slowly, they adjusted. They talked about what had happened, tried to understand it, failed, but kept trying anyway. Claire spent most of her time studying the energy patterns. Dan worked with the ship's systems, noticing small changes in how everything responded. Marie tested their reflexes, their senses, their memories. And Luke? He started to hear things, not voices, just thoughts, ideas, sometimes from the others, sometimes from the ship itself. Once he looked at the navigation screen and knew where to go next without being told. He didn't say much about it. Not yet. But he knew. They were changing, and whatever had attacked them, it would notice. Because when the Aurora moved, the space around them seemed to shift slightly, as if the universe itself was aware of them now, and somewhere far away. Something stirred, something that had been waiting, and it was no longer alone. The Aurora drifted through space, its lights dimmed to save power. The crew had not spoken much since they saw the images. War, death, something vast and unseen watching from the dark. No one knew what it all meant, but none of them could shake the feeling that they were being watched. Luke sat alone in the mess area staring at his coffee. He hadn't touched it in over an hour. His mind kept replaying the voice, the symbols, the pulse inside the alien station. It felt like something had changed inside him, like a door had been opened and he couldn't close it again. Marie entered quietly and sat across from him. She didn't speak at first. She just watched him. "You haven't slept," she said finally. He gave a small shrug. "Neither have you." She smiled slightly. "I've been busy trying to make sure we don't get killed out here." He looked up. "Do you think we already are?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" "We came out here looking for answers," he said. "But maybe we're part of something bigger now. Maybe we've always been." Before Marie could answer, the ship shook. Not hard, but enough to make them both sit up straight. "What was that?" Luke asked, already standing. Marie was already moving toward the bridge. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." They ran down the hall together, reaching the command deck just as Dan and Claire were scrambling at their stations. "Something's wrong," Dan said quickly. "Our systems are glitching." Claire was typing fast, her face pale. "It's not a malfunction. Something is scanning us." "From where?" Luke asked. "Everywhere," she whispered. "And nowhere." Lights flickered across the ship. The hum of the engines stuttered, then returned. The air grew heavy, thick with static. Then came the pain. Not physical, not at first. It started as a pressure behind the eyes, a sharp, cold weight pressing into their skulls. Luke gasped and grabbed his head. Marie fell to one knee. Dan dropped his tablet and screamed. Jessica burst onto the bridge, but before she could ask what was happening, she too froze, clutching her temples. "Get it out," Luke shouted. "Make it stop." Claire tried to shut off the comm system, thinking the signal was coming through the speakers. But the pain wasn't sound. It was thought. It was presence. Something was inside their minds. Dan vomited blood. Marie couldn't breathe. Jessica collapsed. Luke fell to the floor, seeing stars behind his eyes. And then, a flash, a pulse, a sudden silence. The Aurora shuddered once more. Then, everything went still. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Jessica coughed. Dan groaned and rolled over. Marie took deep breaths, trying to steady herself. Claire looked at the screen. "Systems are back online," she said weakly. "Whatever that was. It's gone." Dan wiped his mouth. "No. It left. But it wasn't gone." Luke sat up slowly. "What happened?" Jessica checked his pulse. "I don't know. But whatever scanned us, it was testing us." Dan shook his head. "Or hunting us." Marie stood and walked to the window. Outside, Space was quiet again. No ships, no lights. Nothing but stars. We need to figure this out, she said, because if it comes back, we might not be lucky next time. Back at her station, Claire pulled up the data logs. Most of it was corrupted, but one file remained untouched. She clicked on it and brought up a strange waveform. This wasn't here before, she said. Dan leaned closer. What is it? Claire hesitated. I don't know, but it looks like a response. Luke stood beside her. To what? To us, she said. Someone or something heard us. And now, they're listening back. The room grew quiet again. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant. Somewhere in the dark, something had found them, and it was not done watching. Back aboard the Aurora, Claire sat at her station with a tired look on her face. She had replayed the voice over and over, trying to find something, anything, that might help them understand what they had heard. But every time, it was the same message. You are not the first, but you may be the last. Dan walked in behind her holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Claire without saying anything. She took it with a small nod and sipped slowly. Still nothing? He asked after a moment. She shook her head. No pattern. No repeat. Just that line like it was burned into our brains. Dan sat down beside her. Do you think it was a warning? Claire looked at him. I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe it's a test. He frowned. A test for what? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled up the symbols from the alien station. Lines, curves, circles. None of it made sense at first glance, but there was order to it, something deep underneath. Look at this, she said, pointing at one of the repeating shapes. This symbol keeps showing up. It's always near where we heard the voice. Dan leaned closer. It looks like an eye. Or a target, she replied. Or a signal. He rubbed his eyes. I wish we had more to go on. Meanwhile, in the mess area, Jessica tried to talk to Luke about what had happened inside the chamber. He sat across from her, staring at his untouched food. Luke, she said gently. You haven't eaten all day. He looked up. Sorry. She studied his face. You're still hearing it, aren't you? He nodded slowly. Not exactly. It's more like... I can feel it, like it left something behind. Jessica reached out and touched his hand. Whatever it was, we're here. We'll figure it out together. He gave her a weak smile. Thanks. Marie entered the room and saw them sitting there. We've got movement, she said. They both looked at her. Movement where? Luke asked. Outside, Marie said. Something's changed. They hurried to the bridge where Dan and Claire were already watching. The screen. The alien station had been silent since their arrival, but now new lights were blinking along its surface, slow at first, then faster. It's waking up, Dan whispered. Claire checked the readings. Energy levels are rising. Something's happening. Luke stepped forward. Can we get a better view? Marie tapped a few keys and brought up a live feed from the shuttle's camera. The image showed the station from a distance. The glowing lines across its surface pulsed like veins pumping light through a giant body. Then, suddenly, a beam shot out into space. What the hell was that? Dan asked. Claire was already typing fast. It wasn't aimed at us, it went past us toward deeper space. Like a signal, Marie said quietly. Luke turned to her. Toward what? She hesitated. We don't know yet. But if it was sending a message, someone or something is going to receive it. The mood on the bridge shifted. What had started as a strange discovery was turning into something bigger. They weren't just explorers anymore. They were messengers, maybe even intruders. We need to leave this area, Luke said finally. Dan raised an eyebrow. You think something's coming? I don't know, Luke admitted, but I don't want to be here when it does. They set a new course, moving away from the station. The Aurora's engines hummed as it picked up speed. Behind them, the station continued to pulse with light, like a beacon calling out into the dark. Hours passed. Everyone felt the tension. No one slept well. Even when they tried, the memory of the voice lingered in their minds. Later that night, Claire found something. "Guys," she called from her station. "Come here." Within minutes, the others gathered around her. "I think I figured out part of the message," she said. "It's not just words, it's images too." She tapped a few keys and brought up a new display. At first it looked like static, random flashes of light and color, but then it began to form shapes, ships, dozens of them. Some looked like the station, others were different. Some were burning, others were breaking apart. "War. This isn't just a warning," Marie said softly. "It's a record." Claire zoomed in on one part of the image. A large shape loomed in the background. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't even solid. It was like a shadow given form, stretching across space like a wound. Dan swallowed hard. "What the hell is that?" No one answered, because none of them knew. And somewhere out there, something had just received their reply. The Aurora drifted closer to the object. It was huge, much bigger than they had thought. At first, it looked like a broken space station, but as they got nearer, they saw it wasn't built by humans. The surface was smooth and dark, with glowing lines running across it like veins filled with light. "It's not ours," Dan said, staring at the screen. "Not even close." Marie zoomed in on the outer shell. "Looks like it's been floating here for a long time." Luke stood behind her, arms crossed. "Could be abandoned. Or waiting," Claire added quietly. No one laughed. There was something about the way the structure sat in space, silent, unmoving, that made them all feel uneasy. "We're going in," Luke finally said. "Suit up." They moved quickly. Within 30 minutes, the team was ready. Jessica checked each suit twice before giving the go-ahead. Dan double-checked the shuttle systems. Marie and Claire stayed aboard the Aurora, monitoring from above. Luke led the small team into the shuttle. Beside him were Dan and Jessica. They left the safety of the Aurora and flew toward the alien structure. As they approached, the shuttle lights reflected off the metal, showing strange symbols carved into the walls. Some were deep, others faded. None of them matched any known language. Dan pointed. "Those markings, they look like writing." "Maybe," Luke said, "but we don't know what they mean." They docked carefully. The moment the shuttle connected, the airlock hissed open. Silence met them. Thick, heavy silence. They stepped inside. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit by soft blue lights that pulsed slowly like breathing. The floor was cold under their boots. There was no sound except their own footsteps and the soft hum of their suits. "This place feels alive," Jessica whispered. Dan scanned the walls. No signs of life, just power. Whatever runs this place is still working. They moved deeper inside. The halls twisted and turned. Sometimes they widened into large rooms. Other times they narrowed into tight tunnels. Everything was built with purpose, but nothing looked familiar. Then they found the chamber. It was round with a high ceiling covered in glowing patterns. In the center stood a tall pillar, humming softly. Lights blinked along its surface, changing color every few seconds. "What do you think it is?" Jessica asked. Dan stepped forward, scanning again. "Some kind of control panel. Or maybe a message center?" Luke walked up to the pillar. As he reached out, a sudden pulse of energy shot through the room. The lights flared. The floor vibrated. Then came the voice. Not through speakers. Inside their heads. "You are not the first, but you may be the last." Dan fell back, clutching his helmet. Jessica gasped and stumbled. Luke dropped to one knee, eyes wide. The voice was not loud, but it was everywhere. It didn't scream. It didn't threaten. It simply spoke, and it filled their minds like water filling a cup. What was that?" Jessica managed to say. Dan shook his head. "I don't know, but I felt it in my bones." Luke stood slowly. "We need to get back to the ship." They didn't argue. Within minutes, They were back in the shuttle, flying away from the structure as fast as they could. The Aurora welcomed them with warm lights and steady air. Marie met them at the door. "What happened?" Luke took a breath. "Something spoke to us." Claire frowned. "Who?" "We don't know," Dan said. "But it knew we were coming." Back on the bridge, they replayed everything, the voice, the symbols, the pulse. Claire tried to record the signal, but there was nothing left behind. No trace, no data, just memory. "This changes things," Marie said after a while. Luke nodded. "Yeah, it does." They had come looking for answers. Instead, they had found something else. A warning. And somewhere in the dark, something was listening, waiting. And now, it knew they were here. The stars were quiet as the ship left Earth behind. It wasn't a big launch. No cheering crowds, no flashing lights, no reporters shouting questions. Just a small team, a single ship, and a mission that most people on Earth had barely heard about: the Aurora. Rose slowly into the sky, cutting through the clouds like a thin silver line. Inside, 6 people sat strapped into their seats, watching the blue planet shrink below them. They were not heroes. They were scientists, pilots, engineers, people who had spent years training for this moment. Some were excited. Others were nervous. All of them knew this was the first time humanity had ever sent a ship this far into space. Captain Luke Bennett sat at the front, his hands resting lightly on the controls. He was in his late 30s, with tired eyes and a calm voice. Beside him, Marie Ellis watched the instruments closely. She was the first officer and the one who kept everything running when things went wrong. Behind them, Dan Porter tapped nervously on his tablet, checking the power levels for the 10th time in 10 minutes. "Systems look good," he said finally, more to himself than anyone else. No one answered right away. There wasn't much to say. The silence inside the ship was thick, broken only by the soft hum of machines and the occasional crackle from the comms. They reached orbit in less than an hour. The engines cut out, and for a few moments, everyone floated slightly in their seats before the artificial gravity kicked back in. "Welcome to space," Claire Reynolds said with a dry smile. She was the communications officer, and the only one who tried to keep things light. "Don't get too comfortable," Marie replied, checking the sensors again. "We've got a long way to go." From the observation deck, Jessica Ortiz stared out at the planet below. She was the ship's medic, but she had always dreamed of seeing space up close. Now that she was here, it felt even bigger and emptier than she had imagined. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Dan leaned over her shoulder. "Yeah, but don't forget how dangerous it is." She rolled her eyes. "You always think the worst. Someone has to." Behind them, Luke stood up and stretched. "All right, let's get settled in. We're still just getting started." The Aurora was a small ship built for long missions but not luxury. It had 6 sleeping pods, a shared mess area, and a lab filled with equipment that nobody had used outside of simulations. Every part of the ship had been designed to last, but none of them could hide the fact that they were going where no human had gone before. They spent the next few hours checking systems, setting up routines, and trying to ignore the strange feeling of being completely alone. "We're officially off the map," Claire said later that evening, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee in her hand. Marie looked up from her notes. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Claire said, "there's no one between us and the edge of known space. If something goes wrong, there's no one coming to help." Dan frowned. "That's not helpful. Just saying what we're all thinking." Luke walked in and sat down across from them. "We knew what we were signing up for." "Still doesn't make it any less scary," Jessica said quietly. He nodded. "No, it doesn't. But fear doesn't stop the universe from turning." They ate in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside the windows, the stars burned cold and distant. Hours passed. Then days. They fell into a rhythm. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. They ran tests, studied data, and kept the ship running. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. Space had A way of making people feel small. Then on day 21, the sensors picked up something unusual. Marie was the first to notice. Something's out there. Luke moved to her side. Define something. Unknown object. Large. Drifting near Vega. Claire leaned forward. Could be debris. Or something else, Marie said. Dan checked the readings again. Whatever it is, it's not moving. Luke looked at the screen. The dot blinked once, then again. Set a course, he said. Let's see what we found. The Aurora turned slightly, adjusting its path. Ahead, the unknown object waited in the dark. None of them knew what they were about to find. But somewhere out there, something was waiting for them. And it had been waiting a very long time.